The air in the financial aid office smelled of stale coffee and aggressive hand sanitizer, a sharp chemical sting that I would never forget. Above me, the fluorescent lights hummed with a low, flickering buzz, a headache waiting to happen. I sat frozen, my hands gripping the edge of the cold laminate desk, staring at the screen the bursar had just turned toward me. She didn't say a word, she just slid a single sheet of paper across the gap. It moved with a dry, scraping sound that felt louder than a scream. I didn't want to look, but I had to. There, glowing in harsh red pixels, was the reality I wasn't ready for. Insufficient funds. Balance. $0.00. The room tilted violently. My father's life savings, $80,000, 18 years of sweat and overtime, hadn't just dwindled, it had vanished. That money wasn't just currency, it was a timeline of my father's exhaustion. I can still see his hands, rough and permanently stained with the dark grease of the refinery, trembling slightly as he held out the bank passbook for me to see. He smelled of engine oil and hard labor, a scent that used to embarrass me when I was younger, but now felt like the only honest thing left in the world. "It's not much of a life I'm leaving you," he had whispered, his calloused thumb tracing the balance line. "But this buys you a different one." That $80,000 was 18 years of skipped lunches, double shifts, and boots worn down to the sole. It was his blood and sweat, distilled into a number that was supposed to be my shield against the world. But to my stepmother Linda, it was just a payday. I watched her at the funeral 3 days ago, marveling at the sheer commitment to her role. She was a masterpiece of tragedy, throwing herself across the casket with loud, heaving sobs that echoed off the church walls. The neighbors whispered about her devotion, patting her shoulder and handing her tissues, while the suffocating scent of expensive white lilies, which she had charged to his credit card, choked the air around us. She looked like a broken woman, a widow drowning in grief, clinging to me for support as we walked to the car. Yet, the moment the heavy oak front door clicked shut behind us, the performance ended. It was instantaneous, terrifyingly precise, like a director had yelled, "Cut!" The tears evaporated before they even reached her chin. She kicked off her black heels, sighed not with sorrow but with relief, and walked straight to the kitchen to pour a glass of wine. There was no silence for his memory, no quiet moment of reflection. Instead, there was the jarring, rhythmic click-click-click of her laptop mouse. She wasn't looking at old photos of him. She wasn't canceling his appointments. She was browsing luxury catalogs, her eyes scanning prices with a cold, predatory focus. I stood in the hallway, still wearing my funeral suit, watching the woman who had just buried my father debate between silk drapes and a designer handbag, realizing with a sinking heart that she hadn't lost a husband, she had just gained a bank account. The drive back to the house was a blur of gray highway and tightening chest pains. I parked my old rusted sedan at the curb, Linda didn't like it leaking oil on the pavement, and walked up the driveway, the gravel crunching loudly under my feet like breaking bones. Inside, the house was suffocatingly quiet. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy, pressurized, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath to see what would happen next. I found Linda in the living room, draped over the pristine beige sofa like a queen on her throne. She had a glass of white wine in one hand and a fashion magazine in the other, looking for all the world like a woman without a care, let alone a grief-stricken widow. The soft clink of ice hitting the crystal rim of her glass echoed sharply in the room as I stepped in. She didn't look up. She didn't ask how the meeting went. She just turned a glossy page, the paper snapping crisply. "The account is empty, Linda," I said, my voice sounding strange and hollow to my own ears. $80,000. Gone. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, savoring it before finally deigning to acknowledge me. Her eyes were flat, bored, devoid of even a flicker of surprise. "Oh, that," she sighed, waving her hand vaguely as if swatting away a fly. "Your father, well, he wasn't as organized as he pretended to be, sweetie. Hidden debts, old loans. It gets complicated. Dismissing, Dad didn't have debts, I pushed back, the numbness starting to crack, letting the anger seep through. He showed me the statements. He tracked every penny. People hide things, she interrupted, her voice sharpening, losing its faux sweetness. She finally met my eyes, and there was nothing there but a cold, dismissive wall. The money is gone to pay for his mistakes. Stop digging. You'll only embarrass his memory. She turned back to her magazine, dismissing me entirely, effectively ending the conversation. The gaslighting was so casual, so practiced, that for a second I almost questioned my own sanity. I couldn't breathe in there anymore. The air in the living room felt thin, tainted by her perfume and her lies. I turned and walked out the front door, needing the cold bite of the night air to clear the static in my head. I stood on the porch, gripping the railing, trying to steady the shaking in my hands. That's when the motion sensor floodlights flickered on, bathing the driveway in a harsh, clinical white glare. And there it was. Sitting in the spot where my father's old truck used to be was a monstrosity of chrome and black steel. A brand new, top-of-the-line luxury SUV. It was massive, gleaming aggressively under the lights, looking less like a vehicle and more like a fortress. I walked toward it slowly, drawn by a sickening gravitational pull. The dealer plates were still on, the window was cracked slightly open, and as I leaned in, the scent hit me. An overwhelming, intoxicating wave of cured leather, fresh wax, and factory-new plastic. It was the smell of money. I froze. The math arranged itself in my head with brutal, agonizing clarity. My college fund was $80,000. This car, with its premium trim and leather interior, retailed for almost exactly the same amount. My father's double shifts, his skipped lunches, his aching back, it hadn't disappeared into hidden debts. It hadn't been lost to bureaucratic errors. It was right here, parked on the asphalt. She hadn't just stolen my future. She had driven it home and parked it in the driveway. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. While Linda slept upstairs, wrapped in Egyptian cotton sheets bought with money that wasn't hers, I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling until the silence of the house became deafening. Grief is paralyzing, but rage? Rage is fuel. At 2 a.m. I slipped out of bed, the floorboards groaning softly under my weight, and made my way to the basement door. The air down there was stale, heavy with the smell of damp concrete and decades of old paper. It was a scent that reminded me of my father, not the polished, sanitized version Linda tried to present at the funeral, but the real him. The man who saved every receipt, every warranty, every tax return. He didn't trust computers. He trusted paper, and I was praying that habit would save me now. I didn't turn on the main light. I didn't want to risk waking her. Instead, I clicked on a heavy flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness like a blade. Dust motes danced in the single cone of light, swirling in chaotic patterns as I moved toward the corner where Dad kept his old, dented metal filing cabinets. They were rusted at the edges, jammed full of folders that smelled of mildew and time. I started digging. It wasn't a graceful search. I was tearing through folders, tossing aside owner manuals for lawnmowers broken 10 years ago and tax returns from the 90s. My hands were covered in gray dust, my breath visible in the chilly air. For an hour, I found nothing but the mundane history of a frugal life. Panic started to claw at my throat. What if she had destroyed the records? What if she had shredded the evidence before the funeral guests even arrived? Then, my fingers brushed against a thick manila envelope taped to the back of the bottom drawer. It was hidden, deliberate. I pulled it free, the tape ripping with a sharp zip sound in the quiet basement. I sat on the cold concrete floor, legs crossed, and dumped the contents out. There it was, the original deed of trust. My father hadn't just put money in a savings account. He had created a legal entity, specifically designated for my education, listing me as the sole beneficiary. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was clear. This money was never marital property. It didn't belong to the estate. It didn't belong to his widow. It belonged to me. But proving ownership wasn't enough. I needed to prove theft. I needed to prove she took it, knowing it wasn't hers. I kept digging, fueled by the discovery. Jammed between two hanging folders, I found it, a bank statement from 2 weeks ago. It must have arrived while Dad was in the hospital, and Linda, in her haste, had tossed it down here to hide it from me. I tore it open. Transaction log. And there it was, October 14th. A wire transfer, $78,500. The withdrawal code didn't go to a hospital or a debt collector. It went to Prestige Motors, LLC. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I grabbed my laptop, which was sitting on a stack of old magazines, and flipped it open. The harsh blue light of the screen flooded the dark corner, illuminating my face in a ghostly glow. I logged into Facebook and navigated to Linda's profile. I scrolled back past the fake sympathy posts, past the grieving widow status updates. And then I stopped. October 14th, the exacta photo of Linda, beaming, holding a glass of champagne in one hand and a set of keys in the other. She was leaning against the black SUV in the dealership lot. The caption read, "Hubby would want me to treat myself during this hard time. #new beginnings, #self-care." I looked from the paper statement to the glowing screen. The timestamps were devastatingly perfect. She had drained my education fund at 10 a.m., and by 2 p.m., she was posing for likes with the proceeds. Norwich, I took a screenshot. Then I took a photo of the bank statement. Then I scanned the trust deed. The fear that had been gripping me for days evaporated, replaced by a cold, icy calm. I wasn't just a kid with a sob story anymore. I was a hunter who had just found the blood trail. She thought she had buried the truth along with my father, but she had left fingerprints everywhere. I closed the laptop, the snap echoing in the silence. I finally had everything I needed. The courtroom smelled of furniture polish and old dust, a heavy, suffocating scent that seemed to press against my chest. The silence here wasn't empty, it was expectant. It felt like the air itself was waiting to see who would blink first. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands clasped so tightly together that my knuckles had turned white. Next to me, my attorney, Mr. Vance, was the picture of calm, a statue in a charcoal suit, arranging his files with agonizing precision. Snap, shuffle, slide. The sounds echoed off the high mahogany walls, sharp and deliberate. Corrections. Facing the aisle, Linda was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She was dressed in a modest, high-necked black dress, something I had never seen her wear before. She held a crumpled tissue in one hand, dabbing at eyes that were perfectly dry. Her shoulders were hunched, making her look smaller, frailer. To anyone watching, she was the confused, grieving widow being harassed by a greedy stepchild. She looked over at the gallery, offering a trembling, tragic smile to no one in particular. It made my stomach turn. She was acting like she was the victim of a misunderstanding, not the perpetrator of a theft. The judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on the trest, the judge took a moment from the bench. "Counsel," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet. "You may proceed." Mr. Vance stood up slowly. He didn't walk to the podium. He walked straight to the witness stand where Linda was seated. He didn't yell. He didn't posture. He simply placed a heavy binder on the railing in front of her. Thwack. The sound rang out like a gunshot in the silent room. "Mrs. Linda," he began, his voice dangerously low, "you stated in your deposition that you liquidated the account ending in 4,409, my client's college fund, because you believed it was part of the marital estate. Is that correct?" Linda sniffled, pressing the tissue to her nose. "Yes," she whispered, her voice wavering theatrically. "My husband, he didn't leave a will. I thought I had to manage everything. There were so many bills. I was just trying to survive." Mr. Vance didn't blink. He flipped the binder open to the first tab. "Exhibit A," he announced. "The deed of trust, dated 10 years ago. It explicitly names my client as the sole beneficiary. It also requires a signature from the beneficiary for any withdrawal over $500. He looked up at her. "Do you recognize this signature on the withdrawal slip, Mrs. Linda?" He projected the document onto the screen for the courtroom to see. The signature was a scrawl, a bad imitation of my name. Linda froze. Her eyes darted to her lawyer, then back to the paper. I had power of attorney," she stammered, the frail widow act slipping just a fraction. "He would have wanted me to sign it. It was an emergency." "An emergency," Vance repeated, testing the word like it tasted bad. "You claimed earlier that the money was used for outstanding medical debts. Is that your testimony?" "Yes," she said, gaining a little more confidence. "Hospital bills, the funeral home. It costs so much to bury someone you love." She looked at the judge, eyes widening, pleading for sympathy. "I spent every penny honoring his memory." Vance nodded slowly. He walked back to his table and picked up a second document. He didn't hand it to her gently. He slapped it down on the stand. "Exhibit B," he said, his voice sharpening. "The bank transfer logs." Indonesia a long finger at the highlighted line. "The withdrawal of $78,500 occurred on October 14th. Can you tell the court where this money was wired?" Linda's mouth opened, then closed. The silence stretched, thin and taut as a wire. I don't recall the specific routing number. I paid so many people." "It wasn't a hospital, was it?" Vance asked, stepping closer. "It wasn't a funeral home. It wasn't a doctor." "I don't remember," she snapped, her voice pitching up, the grief vanishing, replaced by a flash of the arrogance I knew so well. "Let me refresh your memory," Vance said. He clicked a button on his remote. The screen in the courtroom changed. It wasn't a document this time. It was the screenshot I had taken in the basement at 3 a.m. The photo of Linda, beaming, holding a glass of champagne next to the black SUV. A ripple of murmurs went through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. She looked from the screen to Linda, her expression shifting from neutral to cold. "Exhibit C," Vance said, his voice ringing with finality. A dealership invoice from Prestige Motors LLC, dated October 14th, the exact same day as the withdrawal. The purchase price for this vehicle was $78,000. Vance turned to Linda, who was now pale, her hands trembling for real this time. "You didn't spend my client's future on debts, Mrs. Linda. You spent it on leather seats and a sunroof. Did you really think we wouldn't check?" "I needed transportation," she shouted, abandoning the whisper entirely. She stood up halfway, gripping the railing. "I am his widow. I deserve to be taken care of. He left me with nothing. That money was sitting there doing nothing while I suffered." "Sit down," the judge ordered, her voice like a crack of thunder. "But sit down," the judge roared. Linda collapsed back into the chair, her chest heaving. The modest black dress suddenly looked like a costume that didn't fit. Her facade had cracked wide open, exposing the greed underneath. She looked frantically at her lawyer, but he was staring at his desk, refusing to meet her eyes. He knew it was over. Vance closed his binder with a soft snap. "No further questions, Your Honor." The room was deathly quiet. The only sound was Linda's jagged breathing. The air felt electrified, heavy with the weight of the lie that had just been dismantled. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since my father died, I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel grief. I looked at the woman who had tried to erase my existence for a car, and I realized she was small, and she was trapped. The judge didn't waste a second on deliberation. She didn't look at her notes. She looked straight at Linda with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "The defendant's actions are not merely illegal," she stated, her voice ice cold. "They are morally repugnant." Longevity. Then came the sound I had been waiting for. Bang! The gavel struck the wood with a finality that vibrated in my bones. Judgment is entered for the plaintiff in the full amount of $80,000, plus legal fees and punitive interest. But she wasn't done. She leaned over the bench, eyes locking onto Linda. "Effective immediately, all assets belonging to the defendant are frozen. Bailiffs are instructed to seize the vehicle purchased with these stolen funds before the defendant leaves this building. Linda slumped in her chair, the air rushing out of her lungs. The arrogance, the grieving widow mask, it all dissolved into ugly, naked panic. She looked frantically at the bailiffs moving toward her, clutching her purse as if that could save her. She turned to me, eyes wide and pleading, mouth opening to beg. I didn't give her the chance. Breaking my father's trust deed, the paper that saved me, and stood up. I didn't stay to watch them take her keys. I didn't stay to hear her excuses. I turned my back on her and walked straight for the heavy double doors. Pushing them open, the cool air hit my face, tasting like absolute freedom. The ledger was finally balanced. She tried to turn my father's legacy into her luxury, but she forgot one thing. The truth always leaves a paper trail.